Abakunzi ba East Africa Daily Update nongeye kubasuhuza kandi nishimiye ko mwatuninze in kugira mwumve iyi raporo yakozwe cyangwa yatanzwe yo bitiriye umukuru wa ONU cyangwa secretary umunyamabanga mukuru wa ONU Antonio Guterres, aho yavuze cyangwa se aho bakoze raporo kubijyanye n'umutekano muri Congo. Ndagira ngo muyumve yose, hanyuma nimugoroba muri amasaha yacu turi buze kuyiganiraho cyangwa se ndayikoraho commentaire, ariko mumaze kuyumva na amasaha abiri abafite umwanya muyumve, noneho nyuma yaho turi buze kuyiganiraho cyangwa se mbabwire bimwe by'ingenzi byavugiwemo. Ariko nta gishyashya mu by'ukuri uretse kuvuga ngo nibahagarike kurwana, bahereza amasezerano ya Luanda, ariko ninjoro yaza kubabwira buri gihugu cyangwa se ibihugu bimwe by'ingenzi twari dutegereje ko icyo bivuga icyo babivuzeho. Reka rero mwumve iyi raporo yose.
Buenos días.
Good morning. The 9,500th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation concerning the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Luanda to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Ms. Bintou Keita, Special Representative of the Secretary-General and Head of the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Ms. Sandrine Lusamba, National Coordinator of Solidarité Féminine pour la Paix. It is so decided.
El Consejo.
The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2023/932, the report of the Secretary-General on the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I now give the floor to Ms. Bintou Keita.
Monsieur le Président,
President, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished members of the Council, allow me at the outset to thank you for this new opportunity to brief the Security Council on the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo on the eve of the renewal of the mission's mandate. I also welcome the presence of His Excellency Mr. Zenon Mkongo Ngay, representative of the government of the DRC, and Ms. Sandrine Lusamba, National Coordinator of Solidarité Féminine pour la Paix. a representative of civil society, as well as the representative of Luanda. We are today at an important crossroads in the relationship between the United Nations and the DRC, but also an important moment for the country itself. The DRC is in the midst of an electoral period, 9 days from a presidential election, as well as national, provincial, and also local elections. The country is also calling for an accelerated, orderly, and responsible withdrawal of MONUSCO, for which a special report of the Secretary-General and a joint disengagement plan have been transmitted to you with the recommendations. The east of the country, and particularly the provinces of Ituri and North Kivu, is still facing an extremely testing security and humanitarian crisis and persistent regional tensions. All of these factors must be taken into account when redefining the partnership which binds us.
Of the Council. The report before you provides an update on the situation on the ground, marked by steady progress in the electoral process. It also highlights the continued and escalating insecurity in the East, especially related to the renewed M23 crisis, but also the emergence of new pockets of insecurity in other parts of the country, notably the Greater Katanga region, as well as Maidombe and Chopo provinces. Unfortunately, since its publication, the situation has further deteriorated in North Kivu. Regional tensions between the DRC and Rwanda have further escalated, heightening the risk of a direct military confrontation that could also draw in Burundi. According to the National Independent Electoral Commission, CENI, elections preparations are advancing well, despite significant logistical, financial and security challenges. As requested by the CENI and consistent with its mandate, MONUSCO has provided logistical support in the provinces where it still operates. 50 tons of electoral material have so far been transported to various locations in Ituri, North and South Kivu. The validation of 26 presidential candidates by the CENI and the Constitutional Court, including 2 female candidates, was a tangible sign of inclusivity, which needs to be appreciated and commended. Nevertheless, the opposition and civil society continue to harbor serious concerns about the publication of the voters' roll, which was not done at all polling stations by 5th December as required by law. The quality of voter cards, the difficulty in obtaining duplicates throughout the country, insufficient communication on voting procedures for those whose cards are defective or do not find themselves on the voter list fuel mistrust among electoral stakeholders. National electoral observation missions have also raised concern about their accreditation, without which they will be unable to ensure proper coverage of the polls. I call on the CENI to do everything in its power to urgently address these issues. While the electoral campaign began relatively peacefully, with most presidential candidates able to tour the country, violent clashes between supporters of rival political parties are occurring in many provinces. Women political leaders and candidates have continued to experience intimidation, as well as physical and verbal misogynic attacks aimed at discouraging their full and active participation in the public arena. MONUSCO, together with United Nations agencies, funds and programs and other partners, has continued to support female and youth candidates, observers and partner witnesses, with the aim of increasing the participation of women and youth in the electoral process. I am also alarmed by the proliferation of mis- and disinformation, as well as hate speech online and offline in the context of the electoral campaign. I call on all stakeholders to refrain from such practices and urge the government to hold those responsible to account. It is also deeply regrettable that over 1.5 million Congolese citizens living in the conflict-affected areas of Masisi and Rutshuru in North Kivu province, as well as Kwamut in Maidobim province, will not be able to vote in December, in addition to internally displaced persons living in sites, IDP sites. Monsieur
President, distinguished members of the Council, the humanitarian, security and human rights situations have unfortunately deteriorated in the south of the province of North Kivu, particularly following a resumption of hostilities between the Congolese armed forces and the M23 since October, and the offensive by the M23 into the Masisi territory, following the withdrawal of the troops of the East Africa Community troops. The tensions between the DRC and Rwanda remain extremely high, and the risk of a military escalation between the two countries remains significant, despite regional and international efforts to smooth the tensions. In this regard, I congratulate the government for having officially prohibited all relations between the FARDC and the Rwanda Democratic Liberation Forces, the FDLR. The expansion of the joint Operation Shuja between the Congolese and Ugandan armed forces in the north of the province has put the armed group ADF under pressure, without, however, preventing new attacks against civilians. In Ituri, insecurity is mainly fed into by the armed groups Codeco, Zaire, FRPI and FPIC, as well as the ADF. Jugu and Irumu are the main hotbeds of insecurity. Coordinated operations of the FARDC and MONUSCO have been able to repel a number of attacks against civilians, but a lack of resources to ensure state authority in the province remains extreme. To protect civilians, MONUSCO and the FARDC have carried out 6 joint operations in Ituri and North Kivu during the previous quarter. The Springbok operation was launched in November, in particular, to secure the towns of Goma and Sake, and thus far is proving effective deterrent against attempts to make progress of the M23 towards these 2 towns. In South Kivu, although violent incidents have decreased in recent months, pockets of insecurity remain, particularly in Kalehe, Mwenga, Shabunda, Uvira and Fizi. I remain concerned regarding the recent increase in tensions between Rwanda and Burundi, following the engagement of the Burundian forces against the M23 in Masisi, and call for calm to avoid any escalation. Upon the request of the Congolese government, the mandate of the Regional Force of the East African Community, the EAC, has not been prolonged beyond the 8th of December, and it has begun its withdrawal. Over 500 soldiers from Kenya, South Sudan and Uganda have already left the DRC. In parallel, the Southern African Development Community, SADC, is preparing to deploy in the upcoming weeks with a new force, the SAMI RDC, which should have an offensive mandate. These regional efforts are commendable. Nevertheless, they cannot achieve their objectives without the continued and sustained investment of the Congolese government in the regional, national and local political conflict resolution processes in the east of the country. This investment must go hand in hand with a reform of the Congolese security sector and the implementation of its Community Disarmament and Reintegration Programme, the PDDRCS. MONUSCO, along with the International Organization of Migration and in close cooperation with the provincial structures of the PDDRCS, continues to support the community reintegration projects for over 6,000 beneficiaries in the 3 provinces to the east.
Distinguished members of the Council, insecurity has compounded the ongoing humanitarian crisis. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, over 6.3 million people are internally displaced across the country. The vast majority of them, 5.5 million, in the 3 eastern provinces alone. According to preliminary figures, over 500,000 people have fled their homes following renewed hostilities between the M23 and the Congolese armed forces since early October. In parallel, outbreaks of cholera and measles have continued to exacerbate the precarious humanitarian situation, with cholera transmission rates being 4 times higher than the previous year. The incidences of gender-based violence and sexual exploitation have reached alarming levels, with more than 90,000 cases documented since the beginning of the year. 39,000 of these cases were recorded in North Kivu alone. This is totally unacceptable. As of November, the country's humanitarian response plan for 23 remained drastically underfunded, with only 35.5% of the required 2.25 billion raised so far. I strongly urge donors to provide the resources required to ensure that humanitarian assistance reaches those in need. With the accelerated withdrawal of the mission, MONUSCO, together with the United Nations country team, is exploring alternative options to ensure continued humanitarian assistance beyond the mission's presence. Mr. President, I welcome the presidential statement of 16 October 23, which ushered in a new phase of constructive cooperation with the government. Following weeks of intensive consultation between the government and MONUSCO, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Francophonie, Mr. Christophe Lutundula, and I signed a joint disengagement plan on 21st November 23, which was submitted to this Council on 23rd November. Throughout this process, MONUSCO will need to focus on its core mandated priorities, namely the protection of civilians, disarmament, demobilization and reintegration, and security sector reform, which remain critical to create an enabling environment for a sustainable disengagement, together with a surge of political engagement in coordination with the Office of the Special Envoy for the Great Lakes. Subject to the Council's authorization, the mission also stands ready to support regional forces operation in full compliance with the human rights due diligence policy. I call on the members of the Council and the broader international community to ensure that all the necessary support, including financial support, is provided to the United Nations agencies, funds and programs in order for them to continue their support in relevant areas to the Congolese authorities and institutions. In closing, let me turn to a profoundly serious issue with the potential to jeopardize all of our efforts in an irreversible way. The misconduct of some of our staff members, be it force, police or civilians, is an indelible stain on our work. I wish to reiterate that the mission, in close coordination with the United Nations headquarters and member states, is working tirelessly to prevent and improve our response to cases of sexual exploitation and abuse. This includes risk assessment and prevention initiative, swift investigative action, and the timely provision of support to victims. Monsieur le Président,
President, distinguished members of the Council, whilst the challenges in the DRC are numerous and complex, they are far from being unsurmountable. As attested to by the current discussions around the general elections, the Congolese people aspire deeply to transparent and inclusive governance, to reforms, and to the responsibility of their leaders. These aspirations and all the forces underpinning them have exhibited great resilience and deserve the full support of the international community. The presidential statement of the 16th of October allowed for the establishment of a constructive partnership between the mission and the government. The renewal of MONUSCO's mandate must allow us to continue this joint effort in a spirit of mutual respect and trust. I thank you.
Agradezco a la señora.
I thank Ms. Keita for her briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Sandrine Lusamba.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to be here once again today to share our thoughts on MONUSCO. My name is Sandrine Lusamba, and I'm the National Coordinator of the Sofepadi NGO, a Congolese organization that campaigns for the protection and promotion of women's rights. Since my last briefing to the Security Council in 2021, the security situation in my country has further deteriorated, despite the presence of MONUSCO peacekeepers and other national and foreign military forces in the country. The DRC is presently at a crossroads. For the first time in approximately a quarter of a century, soon we will no longer host a United Nations peacekeeping operation. However, apart from a press release announcing that the government of the DRC and MONUSCO had agreed on a plan for the mission's disengagement, civil society has scant information and is questioning the content of this plan. The United Nations country team mapped the protection activities and capacities of United Nations agencies, which were identified as part of MONUSCO's mandate. However, this mapping effort was insufficient in terms of the needs assessment and did not take into account the contributions or the participation of civil society and local, national, and international NGOs. This process failed to facilitate the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women and the inclusion of youth as required under Resolution 2594 when a United Nations mission is in transition and as required in the series of Women, Peace, and Security resolutions that the Council has adopted since 2000. In the run-up to the elections, we are witnessing a further rapid deterioration of the security situation in North Kivu province, where intense fighting has led to the displacement of more than 200,000 people since the beginning of October 2023, as well as in Ituri province, where attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure has increased. Sites for IDPs and schools have been targeted, with more than 550,000 people forced to flee since the beginning of the year. Gender-based violence is one of the greatest threats to protection and one of the least resourced sectors in the humanitarian response, even though the international community's commitment to ending this scourge lies at the heart of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. The Council has adopted several Women, Peace, Security resolutions that commit to ensuring a survivor-centered approach when gender-based violence occurs. But this is not the case for women and girls in the DRC. Very few gender-based violence survivors in Eastern DRC receive timely access to medical care and psychosocial support, not to mention the possibility of seeking legal advice or rebuilding their livelihoods for their resilience. MONUSCO's withdrawal is pushing civil society organizations to consider both the opportunities for transferring some of MONUSCO's tasks and the risks posed by such a withdrawal. Turning to opportunities, let us note that some of the activities of the Civil Affairs section of MONUSCO could be transferred to local NGOs in accordance with the commitments to localize humanitarian assistance. This transfer would require that the resources and support be provided for NGOs, to NGOs, and for necessary resources and support to be provided for them to carry out their responsibilities in a sustainable and quality way. For example, NGOs could carry out social cohesion projects that include the organization of inter- and intra-community dialogues and action research. NGOs could take over some of the activities of MONUSCO's Child Protection Section alongside UNICEF and the United Nations country team. And they should have the means necessary to shoulder greater responsibility in terms of monitoring, reporting, and responding to grave violations against children. Similarly, MONUSCO's gender section has been an important ally when it comes to fighting impunity for gender-based violence. They recruited forensic doctors with expertise in gender-based violence for the production of forensic evidence in order to improve access to justice for victims. It is essential that this work continue. Local women's organizations with gender-based violence expertise, which enjoy the trust of survivors, are a logical partner to take on this role. Of course, there are many risks associated with the withdrawal of MONUSCO. These risks include deterioration of the protection of civilians and the protection of IDP sites, including in areas that are not accessible to the armed forces and the police. They include lack of monitoring and reporting on human rights by the Joint Human Rights Office. This will also have an adverse impact on the early warning system and will lack verified data on existing violence that the United Nations uses to report on human rights in the DRC, and more broadly, to monitor violations of women's rights. We also fear that human rights defenders and peacekeepers and peace builders, especially women leaders in these positions, may also face increased harassment and other protection threats. This risks also include increased unemployment, as a large part of the MONUSCO's civilian workforce from the local community will lose their jobs. And the risk also includes closure of the Okapi radio. This radio serves as an essential independent community platform to spread messages freely without distinction and to advance mobilization efforts against gender-based violence. In light of these observations, I wish to make the following recommendations. Firstly, in line with the call of the Secretary General, women need to be placed at the center of the work of MONUSCO and the United Nations country team. Women need to lead decision-making in all areas, including humanitarian action, and to lead decisions on the investment of resources and energies so that the response focuses on the most marginalized and at-risk groups. Second, MONUSCO and the United Nations country team should work with local and national NGOs to develop specific indicators to measure the protection and promotion of women's human rights, including in the areas of gender-based violence, attacks against women human rights defenders, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and women's meaningful participation. These indicators should be used to determine whether the security situation is improving or not, and should be used to drive early warning efforts. Third, the Security Council should require the government and all other actors to integrate a human rights-based approach and survivor-centered approach throughout humanitarian action. This is necessary to fulfill their obligations under IHL and to further ensure that efforts to address the climate crisis and to manage natural resources are gender sensitive. And lastly, the international donor community must not abandon the people of the DRC. The government should be fully supported in order to fulfill its responsibilities in the area of protection. The humanitarian response plan needs to be fully funded, and women-led and women's rights organizations should have access to sufficient resources and continuous funding. Thank you.
Agradezco a la señora.
I thank Ms. Lusamba for her briefing. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of France. President, I thank the Special Representative of the Secretary-General and wish to reiterate France's full support. I wish to make 3 points. Firstly, the international community must continue to support the Democratic Republic of the Congo in organizing elections. France notes progress made in the electoral process and the efforts of the National Independent Electoral Commission to organize credible elections respecting deadlines. France encourages all stakeholders to redouble their efforts to allow for smooth elections. Security and upholding public freedoms will be decisive. We call upon all parties to abstain from any violence or hate speech. Deliberate actions to destabilize the DRC in the lead-up to the elections or to disrupt the process would be unacceptable. France is concerned regarding the tensions in the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The M23 must cease its offensive, withdraw and canton. Rwanda must bring an end to its support for the M23 and to the presence of troops on Congolese territory. The armed forces of the DRC must cease all collaboration with the FDLR, as is in line with their commitments. Any military approach can only contribute to escalation. Only dialogue and a relaunch of the Luanda and Nairobi processes, once the elections are over, will allow for a sustainable solution to this crisis, and France is ready to work to this end. Secondly, France welcomes the efforts made by the Congolese authorities and MONUSCO to finalize the mission's joint disengagement plan. In a presidential statement in October, this Council committed to decide by the end of the year upon the future of the mission. The disengagement plan is in compliance with these requirements and indicates that protection of civilians must remain a priority. France welcomes the spirit of responsibility emanating from this plan. The authorities of the DRC have already taken measures to recruit and train soldiers and police. We encourage them to spare no effort so that the transition does not lead to a security vacuum. France fully supports the principle of an evaluation at the end of each stage. It is for these reasons, and this is my third point, that France has proposed to the members of this Council that there be a resolution to implement this disengagement plan. This flows from the work done over recent months. It includes the disengagement plan, particularly the withdrawal from South Kivu on the 30th of April. It provides for a consequent adjustment in troop ceilings and also calls for a new joint report from the Congolese authorities and MONUSCO following the first phase. This resolution gives all stakeholders the necessary visibility to prepare for subsequent phases. President, we can make the withdrawal of MONUSCO into a success. Many responsibilities will gradually be transferred to the authorities of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The whole of the United Nations system and its partners must support their efforts. France will play its part and continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with the DRC. I thank you. I thank the representative of France for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3. First of all, we would like to commend SRSG Bintu Keita for her remarkable work in the DRC, as well as for her comprehensive briefing today, which has shed light on the situation in the DRC and the activities of MONUSCO in that regard. We thank Ms. Sandrine Lusamba for her briefing and welcome the presence of the permanent representative of the DRC, as well as the Chargé d'Affaires of Rwanda. Mr. President, our intervention will focus on three main areas, namely the political, security, and humanitarian situations. On the political front, the A3 notes the launch of the electoral campaign on 19 November 2023 in view of the general elections scheduled for 20th December 2023. With 44 million voters, we welcome the government's commitment to organizing presidential and local elections in a particularly difficult security context. Despite the logistical and security challenges, the effective holding of these elections is expected by the Congolese population, which aspires to be free, transparent, and peaceful elections. We call on all political actors, including the opposition and civil society, to engage constructively in strengthening social cohesion, national unity, and dialogue in order to prevent post-electoral tensions. We encourage the Independent National Electoral Commission to take confidence-building measures and maintain dialogue with all political actors so that the results of these elections are accepted by all. In this regard, the support provided by MONUSCO is highly appreciated. We further encourage the Congolese authorities to spare no efforts in ensuring that good neighborliness and regional stability also remain a priority before, during, and after the elections. At the regional level, the A3 reiterates its support for a political resolution of the security crisis affecting the east of the DRC. We reaffirm our support to regional processes which are credible African political solutions to end the crisis. To this end, it is urgent to implement the priority actions contained in the Nairobi and Luanda agreements with a view to the cessation of hostilities, the immediate withdrawal of the M23 from occupied areas, the repatriation of all foreign armed groups and foreigners, and respect by local armed groups for the disarmament, demobilization, community recovery, and stabilization program. We welcome the commitment of the African Union to support the stabilization of the Democratic Republic of Congo by ensuring the coordination and harmonization of regional peace initiatives, in particular through the organization of the meeting of the Chiefs of Staff of the quadripartite composed of the East African Community, the Economic Community of Central African States, the International Conference on the Great Lakes Region, and the Southern African Development Community, with the participation of the UN on 6 October 2023 in Addis Ababa. Mr. President, at this crucial stage of its history, the security situation in DRC remains a source of great concern for the A3. We are particularly dismayed by the deterioration of the security situation in Ituri and Kivu provinces due to the recurrence of attacks by armed groups. Despite joint efforts by the DRC and MONUSCO, supported by several countries in the region, Eastern Congo remains subject to a cycle of violence perpetrated mainly by armed groups such as the M23, Allied Democratic Forces, the Cooperative for the Development of Congo, and the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda. The attacks by the Islamic State-affiliated ADF, a terrorist group, which has increasingly resorted to the use of improvised explosive devices, contribute to the worsening of the cycle of terror in which the Congolese population live. In addition, the A3 takes note of the signing on 21st November 2023 of the disengagement plan and timetable between MONUSCO and the DRC, as well as the DRC request to reflect this plan in the resolution on the renewal of MONUSCO's mandate currently under negotiation. It is imperative to ensure the protection of civilians throughout this process. In this regard, and within the context of the implementation of this plan, We encourage the DRC and MONUSCO to continue promoting constructive dialogue so as to ensure a concerted, orderly, and responsible withdrawal. The increase in violence against civilians by armed groups is exacerbating the humanitarian situation in the DRC. With the highest number of internally displaced people in Africa, the humanitarian crisis in the country is reaching record levels in the absence of adequate funding for the humanitarian response plan. We urge international donors to mobilize to respond to the immense humanitarian needs. The A3 acknowledges the remarkable work of humanitarian organizations who, risking their lives, provide continuous support to the people of the DRC. Moreover, we pay tribute to all the peacekeepers, the armed forces of the DRC, and the civilians who have lost their lives while working for peace in this country. We call on MONUSCO and the DRC to take all necessary measures to ensure that the withdrawal of the mission does not affect the activity and security of humanitarian workers. Mr. President, finally, the A3 acknowledges the invaluable contribution of MONUSCO to the stabilization of the DRC, and we affirm our support to Mrs. Bintou Keita and her team. Furthermore, the A3 reiterates its solidarity with the government and the people of the DRC. We also reaffirm our commitment to respecting the independence, territorial integrity, and sovereignty of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the representative of Ghana for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
RSG Keita for your informative briefing today. I would also like to welcome the representatives of the DRC and Rwanda at today's meeting. SRSG Keita, the United States appreciates the dedication you, your team, and the DRC government have shown in producing a plan for MONUSCO's gradual and responsible withdrawal from the DRC. We also appreciate the DRC government's commitment to assuming responsibility for civilian protection and extending state authority in the provinces where MONUSCO is deployed. The proof, however, will be in implementation. This Council will closely monitor MONUSCO's disengagement with a focus on the ability of DRC security forces to provide stability and security as peacekeepers draw down. We welcome the flexibility built into the plan and stress the drawdown from each province should be thoroughly and transparently evaluated for any negative impacts on civilian protection and the humanitarian situation. Major gaps will be unacceptable and should prompt an immediate reassessment and a pause in subsequent phases. We welcome the Joint Working Group's commitment to review progress on implementation of the plan every 3 months and request these assessments be shared with the Security Council. As in other peacekeeping transitions, MONUSCO's drawdown will be challenging. The DRC faces a looming financial cliff when transitioning from assessed to voluntary contributions amidst growing humanitarian and development needs. The United States Agency for International Development and the Department of State allocated more than $956 million in humanitarian aid and bilateral assistance to the DRC in fiscal year 2022, not including our support to MONUSCO. We call on the international community to mobilize additional resources now to bolster the work of UN agencies, funds, and programs in preparation for MONUSCO's departure. MONUSCO's drawdown also demands a new vision for security and non-security solutions to the Eastern DRC's 30-year crisis. Regional organizations and security forces are playing an important role, but in order to provide support, the international community needs greater clarity on their mandates, operational requirements, and human rights frameworks. The deployment of regional forces must be accompanied by renewed engagement in political processes. The speed at which Rwanda and the DRC approached the brink of war in recent weeks was alarming. We welcome the commitments both governments have made toward de-escalation, but more must be done to reduce tensions and prevent miscalculations. Again, we call on Rwanda to end its support for M23 and withdraw from DRC territory. We urge all actors to recommit to the Nairobi and Luanda processes and take advantage of new space for dialogue following elections in the DRC later this month. We are encouraged by the DRC government's preparations, which MONUSCO has supported, for free and fair elections on December 20. The increase in registered female candidates is commendable, though their participation remains low. The fact that many have faced threats of violence is deplorable. We urge political actors and civilians alike to refrain from hate speech and divisive rhetoric, which could lead to violence. All Congolese should be able to cast their votes without fearing for their safety and must be able to view results at the polling station and online in a timely fashion. We regret that elections will not take place in Rutshuru and Masisi due to insecurity. Finally, this reporting period brought to light deeply concerning allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse in MONUSCO. The United States is fully committed to the UN zero-tolerance policy on SEA. We urge member states to join us as we engage with MONUSCO and the UN Secretariat to ensure peacekeepers and mission personnel are held accountable for conduct and discipline, as well as performance. Thank you, Mr. President.
Agradezco al representante.
I thank the representative of the United States for that statement and now give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Special Representative Bintou Keita for her briefing. I also thank Ms. Sandrine Luzamba for bringing to the Council her perspectives on the fragile situation in the eastern provinces of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I welcome the delegations of the DRC and Rwanda to this meeting. Brazil welcomes the latest report from the Secretary General, which provides updates on the situation in the DRC and on MONUSCO's transition process. This is a crucial moment for the people of the DRC, and it deserves our careful attention. We remain concerned by the deteriorating security situation in eastern DRC. Episodes of violation of the ceasefire between the M23 and the FARDC and heightened regional tensions constitute a step back in the efforts to stabilize the situation. We call on all parties to the conflict and the neighboring countries to re-engage in the political processes, notably the Luanda and Nairobi processes, to find a long-term solution that ensures sustainable peace in the region. We also reiterate our calls for all armed groups to lay down their arms and for all external support to illegal armed groups to cease immediately. My delegation is appalled by the continued humanitarian impact of this conflict and by the surge in reported conflict-related sexual violence. We reiterate the need for unimpeded humanitarian access in the DRC and the full protection of IDP camps, especially for women and girls. It is unacceptable that vulnerable people face violence and exploitation in places where they were supposed to find protection and support. Mr. President, the transition of MONUSCO takes place in a very challenging and complex environment. As we prepare to renew the mission's mandate, taking into consideration the disengagement plan agreed between the UN and the Congolese government, the focus must be on the responsible transfer of tasks. Brazil reiterates that MONUSCO's departure should be done responsibly, avoiding potential risks of creating more violence and human rights abuses against the population. The Congolese state's capabilities and authority must be strengthened to ensure the protection of civilians. The transition and withdrawal must be well coordinated with national and provincial authorities, neighboring countries, and other relevant stakeholders. As the SADC forces prepare to engage North Kivu, we expect them to act in full cooperation with MONUSCO. Regarding the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration process in the DRC and the security sector reform, Brazil believes that MONUSCO's support must continue until the very end of the mission, as they are essential pieces of the transition process. Mr. President, despite the challenges pointed out in the SG's report regarding the upcoming general elections, we are confident that the people of the DRC will be able to overcome polarization and pervasive hate speech. It is the primary responsibility of key political players to ensure that the upcoming elections be an opportunity for making real progress towards sustained peace and development for all Congolese. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Brazil for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President, I thank Isaba for her briefing. China will continue to support your work and the work of MONUSCO. I've also listened attentively to the statement made by Ms. Sandra Lusamba. I welcome the presence of the prominent representatives of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda at this meeting. As Isaba has pointed out, the DRC is at a critical stage in advancing this political process, maintaining security and stability. A peaceful, stable and developing DRC is in the shared interest of the countries in the region and the international community. I wish to underscore the following points. First, the general elections in the DRC are just around the corner. China appreciates the tremendous efforts made by the DRC government and the Independent National Electoral Commission in preparation of the elections. China is confident that the government and people of the DRC are able to hold peaceful elections that will give new impetus to the country's long-term stability. The general elections are the internal affairs of the DRC. The international community should fully respect the DRC's sovereignty and ownership, encourage all parties in the region to settle differences through dialogue and consultation, and avoid interfering in the DRC's internal affairs. Second, the security situation in eastern DRC remains grave, marked by continued attacks by armed groups such as M23, resulting in casualties and displacement. China supports the FARDC and MONUSCO carrying out joint operations and urges M23 and other armed groups to immediately cease hostilities and violence and withdraw from the territories they occupy. The situation in Eastern DRC bears on the overall security of the region. The international community should support the Nairobi process and the Luanda process and support the countries concerned in resolving their differences through dialogue and consultation. China encourages Special Envoy Xia Huang and SRSG Kita to provide more support to regional political process and foster synergies. China supports regional organizations in carrying out peacekeeping operations and hopes that regional countries will strengthen coordination with the DRC in order to safeguard common security of the region. Third, China welcomes the signing of the comprehensive disengagement plan by the DRC government and MONUSCO, agreeing on the phased drawdown and withdrawal of MONUSCO. The Security Council is now discussing a resolution on the renewal of MONUSCO's mandate. China hopes that the Council will follow the comprehensive disengagement plan, attach importance to the views of the DRC, and define sound transitional arrangements for MONUSCO. MONUSCO's upcoming transition should feature proper handover of tasks to the DRC government, which will be conducive to the maintenance of security and stability in the region in the areas from which it withdraws. Efforts will be made to ensure a safe and orderly transition of MONUSCO and guarantee the safety of UN peacekeepers and assets. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to express my gratitude to SRSG Keita and Ms. Lusamba, National Coordinator of SOFEPAD, for their briefings. I welcome the participation of representatives from the DRC as well as Rwanda. The DRC is going through a significant transition with formidable challenges. With the general election imminent and the start of MONUSCO's withdrawal in sight, I'd like to highlight 3 points today, starting with security. We continue to see with grave concern the worsening security situation and the deterioration of human security in the eastern provinces of the DRC. The violation of the ceasefire agreement between the M23 and the Congolese armed forces has far-reaching devastating impacts on people's lives. The reported newly created coalition of armed groups fighting in support of the Congolese armed forces has further compounded hostilities and violence, triggering a massive flow of IDPs. I wish to stress again that support of any kind to armed groups only exacerbates insecurity and regional tensions and must be stopped immediately. All Congolese and foreign armed groups must unconditionally lay down their arms and engage in the DDR process. Community-based reintegration efforts through dialogue with employment opportunities is the key for increased participation in the DDR process, which Japan also supports through UNOPS and UNDP. We welcome the initiative of MONUSCO and the IOM in this regard. The second point is about the planned exit strategy of MONUSCO. A gradual, responsible, and sustainable withdrawal requires close and constructive cooperation amongst all stakeholders, guided by strong ownership by the host country. Ensuring adequate protection of civilians must always be front and center in our collective endeavors. Here, timely development of national security forces synchronized with the planned withdrawal of MONUSCO troops is essential to avoid any security vacuum on the ground. Furthermore, the protection of the United Nations personnel, facilities, installations, and equipment must be ensured throughout the withdrawal process. The high number of human rights violations, including sexual violence, remains our deep concern. The ongoing whole of UN system efforts to help build state-owned early warning and response system within communities should be further promoted to create a conducive environment for the sustainable withdrawal of MONUSCO. Finally, the forthcoming election must be an opportunity to win people's confidence and build unity. Strengthening social cohesion is fundamental for sustainable stability, and thus the DRC requires free, fair, inclusive, peaceful and transparent elections more than ever. Reported election-related violence, as well as a reduction of civic and political space, are worrying signs and must be halted by all stakeholders. Mr. President, Japan remains committed to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of the DRC. We are determined to continue working together with MONUSCO and all partners for sustainable peace and stability in the region. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
And I also thank SRSG Keita and Ms. Lusamba for their insightful briefings today. I also welcome the representatives of the DRC and Rwanda to today's meeting. The Democratic Republic of the Congo stands at a critical juncture. Tensions with Rwanda remain alarming, and the use of proxies increases the risk of open conflict. Armed groups continue to commit atrocities and to terrorize civilians. Rising humanitarian needs are reaching levels that are simply impossible to address. Intercommunal sexual and gender-based violence is increasing widely, even outside the eastern provinces. Additionally, heightened tensions in the build-up to the incoming elections give rise to concern. Transparent, inclusive and fair electoral processes are essential to ensure a stable government for the country's future. Within this sobering context, the Security Council is negotiating the renewal of MONUSCO. Let me thank France for leading the current negotiations carefully, considering both the Secretary General's assessment and the disengagement plan. Attempting to build on these important documents, Malta will contribute to negotiations by focusing on the protection of children in armed conflict. After 2 years, we recently convened with the Country Task Force on monitoring and reporting of the DRC to address specific issues related to the mission's withdrawal and its potential impact on children. The figures are shocking. Reported grave violations strongly underestimate the real numbers due to a lack of access to certain areas and untracked violations, among other reasons. The reported number of casualties so far indicates that 2023 might become the deadliest year for children since the establishment of the monitoring and reporting mechanism in 2005. Children are also facing increased risks. During the electoral period, children are associated with or voluntarily join political or electoral demonstrations. This potentially exposes them to violence and repression. We thank MONUSCO and UNICEF for their work ensuring that political parties sign a charter against the use of children for political and electoral purposes. Simultaneously, the perceived tolerance of patriotic armed groups mobilized to fight against the M23 has lurched to an upsurge of child recruitment. President, implementing a responsible withdrawal of MONUSCO means protecting the most vulnerable. Malta advocates for sufficient residual civilian presence in regions where the military will depart, allowing time for knowledge transfer, training, and capacity building. We must preserve the gains achieved so far. Together with Congolese authorities, MONUSCO and UNICEF have done commendable work, leading, among other achievements, to new verified cases of recruitment and use of children by FARDC between 2021 and 2023. Regarding WPS, we are encouraged by a strong presence of female candidates for upcoming elections. We encourage additional measures to promote and facilitate women's full, equal, meaningful, and safe participation in the political process. We also ask the UN to consult regularly with women's civil society organizations and to ensure that comprehensive gender analysis and technical gender expertise is included throughout the transition. We commend the adoption of a law on the protection and reparations for victims of conflict-related sexual violence. In conclusion, President, Malta is determined to ensure collective measures to mitigate the impact of the transition and remains ready to engage with Council members to consensually adopt the renewal of MONUSCO. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. Let me begin by thanking SOSG Keita and Ms. Lusumba for briefing us today. I welcome the participation of the representatives of the DRC and Rwanda at this meeting. President, the United Kingdom reiterates its full support for the work carried out by MONUSCO and SOSG Keita in challenging circumstances. I would like to make 3 points in response to what we have heard today. First, the UK commends the government of the DRC and MONUSCO for their collaboration on the forced disengagement plan, which includes, where appropriate, the transfer of tasks to the UN country team and other international partners. We welcome the government's commitment to a gradual, responsive, responsible and sustainable withdrawal process. Second, with the departure of MONUSCO, the DRC must assume its responsibilities to protect the civilian population. We urge the government to step up preparations in this regard, and we encourage MONUSCO to continue its capacity building efforts with the government to ensure a smooth transition. Intensifying violence, changing movements of regional forces on the ground, soaring numbers of victims of conflict-related sexual violence, particularly in IDP camps in eastern DRC, and a deteriorating humanitarian situation highlight the urgency of getting this process right. Third, we continue to urge restraint and dialogue from all parties, given the real risk of miscalculation and the horrendous cost of further escalation. In particular, we urge all parties to recommit to the Nairobi and Luanda regional peace-building processes, which are the best roadmaps towards a peaceful DRC. We commend the contribution of the East African Community and the East African Community Regional Force. Dialogue, not violence, is the way to achieve lasting peace. We urge all parties and countries in the region to fulfill commitments to revitalise these political processes and deliver tangible action to address shared security challenges, improve humanitarian access, and reduce violence. Finally, President, we look forward to peaceful, credible, and inclusive elections on 20 December, which will provide a chance to anchor democracy in the DRC. The UK looks forward to working with the new government. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me at the outset to thank the Special Representative, Mrs. Keita, for her briefing, and we appreciate her efforts and the efforts of her team to support peace in the DRC. We also welcome the participation of the representatives of the DRC and Rwanda in today's meeting. Mr. President, we convene today at a very critical moment for the DRC. In just over a week's time, the Congolese people will be heading to the polls to participate in an electoral process that we hope would help shape the future of the country in line with their aspirations. We encourage MONUSCO and the UN country team to continue providing the support needed to ensure the success of this electoral process. It is also important to ensure the full, equal and meaningful participation of women in all phases of the electoral process. Their role is pivotal to building and consolidating peace. In our discussion today, I would like to emphasize 4 main points. 1. The protection of civilians should remain a top priority. Their continued exposure to attacks by armed groups is very worrying, especially in North Kivu. The region continues to see growing violence stemming from the violation of the ceasefire between the March 23 movement and the Congolese army. In this context, we reiterate our condemnation of acts of violence committed by armed groups, including the M23, whom we call upon to recommit to the ceasefire and to what was agreed upon in the Luanda statement issued in November last year. We also call on all other armed groups to lay down their arms, permanently and unconditionally cease their hostilities, and seriously engage in the disarmament process. We reaffirm the UAE's firm commitment to supporting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC. We reaffirm the need to protect women and girls from acts of violence, especially sexual violence, which has reached unprecedented levels. As UN agencies indicate, insecurity in the East has led to a significant increase in sexual violence incidents since March last year. Therefore, addressing these extremely worrying situations in a sustainable manner requires an integrated approach that strengthens the capacities of relevant institutions to respond to and prevent sexual violence. 2. It is very important that dialogue and constructive communication between the DRC and regional actors are enabled to continue, especially among the neighboring countries. The security and stability of the DRC lies on the security and stability of the whole region. We must also ensure that local, regional and international partners continue their efforts to prevent and de-escalate tensions whenever they arise. This requires more communication and coordination between various actors in this aspect. During the current transitional phase, namely the withdrawal of the regional forces of the East African Community and the planning for the deployment of the Southern African Development Community, as well as the accelerated gradual withdrawal of MONUSCO, it is important not to leave any vacuum that armed groups may exploit to undermine peace efforts. There is therefore a need for enhanced coordination between the withdrawing forces and the incoming ones. 3. Addressing the fast deteriorating humanitarian situation in the DRC requires a collaborative response between the government and the international community that addresses immediate needs while also planning for the long term. According to the International Organization for Migration, the number of internally displaced people has increased to unprecedented levels in the DRC. There are now approximately 7 million displaced people, most of whom fled due to the intensification of conflict in North Kivu. It is critical to continue making efforts to reach all those in need. Despite the fact that expanding the operational capabilities of humanitarian organizations' emergency systems has enabled them to reach 3 million people, there are still some serious obstacles preventing this aid from reaching more than 2 million people who are still in need for support. 4. Regarding the Council's current deliberations on the future of MONUSCO, we stress the need to prioritize the needs of the Congolese people and their aspirations. We appreciate the efforts of Special Representative Ms. Kita and her team and their cooperation with the Congolese government to develop a plan to gradually accelerate MONUSCO's withdrawal. In conclusion, we need a comprehensive approach to address the various challenges in the DRC, including those related to climate change and conflict prevention, while responding to urgent needs on the ground. These are fundamental issues that ensure the stability of the DRC in the long term. We stress the UAE's commitment to constructive engagement with Council members as part of the negotiations on MONUSCO to ensure that the Council can provide adequate support to the DRC in line with the country's priorities. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. We wish to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Madam Bintou Keita, for her briefing. We listened attentively to the statement delivered by Sandrine Lusamba, and we welcome the participation in today's meeting of representatives of DR.Congo and Rwanda. We are very much concerned in connection with the violations of the ceasefire regime between the armed forces of DR.Congo and the M23 group. The resumption of hostilities, first and foremost, has an impact on the civilian population and results in suffering endured by ordinary civilians. We have already observed the latest wave of internal displacement in the country. The overall number of IDPs, according to various assessments, has reached a record level for DR.Congo. There are 7 million people displaced. This is a staggering figure. At the same time, the humanitarian response plan of the United Nations for the year 2023 remains chronically underfunded. Only 37.5% of the necessary resources have been gathered. The ongoing nature of the military conflict in the eastern Congolese provinces very clearly will result in the further deterioration in quality of the humanitarian situation. We are also concerned by the growth of instability in the west of the country, specifically in the Mai Ndomba province. We call upon all illegal armed groups operating in the DRC to abandon violent methods, to lay down their weapons, and without preconditions to participate in the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration program. We have taken note of the decision of Kinshasa to terminate the mandate of the regional forces of the East African Community. At the same time, we trust that the work of the political track of the Nairobi process will continue, a critical component of which is dialogue between the Congolese government and those groups who are willing to eschew violence. Only political solutions will result in a comprehensive cessation of hostilities and will establish real conditions for sustained stabilization. We attribute principled significance to the achievement of concrete results through the Luanda process. We call for intensification of regional mediation to surmount and dispel tensions in relations between Kinshasa and Kigali. Further, we believe that it is necessary to continue to pool mutually complementary efforts and initiatives for regional assistance. We note the forthcoming deployment in the east of the DRC of a SADC contingent. We believe it is important to ensure that there be the necessary level of coordination with MONUSCO to determine effective modalities for joint efforts to overcome instability. We are advocating for the mission to have the possibility to provide specific level of support to the regional forces. We support MONUSCO's efforts and those of its leadership. The presence of the mission in the conflict zone constitutes an important stabilizing factor. For this reason, in the withdrawal of peacekeepers, we believe it is of fundamental importance to first and foremost be guided by rational considerations, to take into account developments of the situation on the ground, and to operate in a phased, responsible way. We note that this approach incorporates the plan that was recently signed by the Congolese authorities and leadership of the mission for the MONUSCO's disengagement. The provisions of this plan need to be reflected in the mission's mandate, which the members of the Security Council are currently working to adopt. We, like other members of the Security Council, call for a scrupulous investigation into the serious breaches of discipline committed by peacekeepers to identify and to punish perpetrators. This pertains to incidents of personnel of the mission being accused of crimes of a sexual nature. However, all measures, as is stipulated in the organization's norms and rules, all measures need to be adopted in direct coordination with the troop contributing countries, those countries against whose military personnel charges were filed. At the United Nations, the necessary mechanisms have been developed to counter sexual abuse, and we need to focus on leveraging the existing package of measures. We object to any opportunistic initiatives, at the heart of which lie proposals for collective punishment for individual misconduct, which provide for personal accountability. We hope that there will be a receipt in a timely way from both the authorities of the DRC and the United Nations for the United Nations to receive comprehensive information on the course of the investigation into the tragedy with the downed MONUSCO helicopter in March 2022 in the east of the country. We all remember that as a result of this crash, 8 peacekeepers perished, including our compatriot, a senior member of the Russian military observer team, Alexei Mizura. The perpetrators need to be found and held accountable. To conclude, I'd like to wish the government of the DRC every success in the organization of general elections on 20 October. The Russian Federation is a permanent member of the Security Council. As such, we will continue to spare no effort to help facilitate the resolution to the crisis in the east of the DRC, including at this critical juncture when the withdrawal of MONUSCO is beginning. Thank you for your attention.
Agradezco a la representante de la...
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland. Thank you, President. I would also like to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary-General, Ms. Bintou Keita, and Ms. Sandrine Lusamba for their presentations and their commitment. I welcome the participation of the representatives of the states of the region. During a recent visit to the DRC by a delegation from my ministry, we met Petronile Vaveka. She is a long-standing representative of Congolese civil society and told us, and I quote, "Despite the persistence of conflict and suffering in the East, I am convinced that we can build peace. That's why I'm still standing. I would like to reaffirm to the Congolese people Switzerland's commitment to promoting lasting peace in the country. In this respect, I would like to address 3 points. Firstly, MONUSCO's disengagement must be responsible and carried out in stages. Switzerland welcomes the collaboration between the Congolese authorities and the mission in drawing up the disengagement plan. We recognize the DRC's call for a gradual withdrawal of the mission. We welcome the government's determination to ensure that the withdrawal is carried out responsibly and in a staged manner. This means giving priority to the protection of civilians and ensuring an inclusive and collaborative process, including with civil society. With a view to the deployment of regional forces in the DRC, it is essential that any support from MONUSCO be in strict compliance with the human rights due diligence policy. The regional forces should apply the African Union's compliance framework and include the protection of civilians in their mandate. Finally, with the withdrawal of the mission from South Kivu in 2024, we encourage the DRC to strengthen the rule of law, the security sector, and the implementation of the demobilization, disarmament, and reintegration process for armed groups. Secondly, political initiatives must be reinvigorated to put an end to clashes and to consolidate a lasting peace. At the regional level, Switzerland calls on all parties to exercise restraint and de-escalation. A sincere and well-founded dialogue, particularly between the DRC and Rwanda, is urgently needed to put an end to the cycles of violence. To this end, all support for armed groups, in particularly the M23 and the FDLR, must cease immediately. In this regard, Switzerland takes note of the Congolese government's decision to prohibit its officers from contact with the FDLR. At a national level, the DRC must make every effort to guarantee civic space for its people, particularly in the context of the elections. It is imperative that the Congolese people are able to freely vote without fear of reprisals. Meanwhile, all candidates have a responsibility to ensure that the electoral process is peaceful and free of hate speech. We regret that the populations of certain territories, notably Masisi and Rutshuru, are deprived of the opportunity to participate in the electoral process. Thirdly, all parties must respect international humanitarian and human rights law. The intensification of fighting in the east of the DRC since October is worrying. Increased attacks by armed groups in North Kivu and Ituri, in particular Wazalendo, M23, ADF and Codeco, are having a devastating impact on the civilian population. At a time when the number of victims of violation of international law is rising dramatically, insecurity is hampering people's access to humanitarian aid. These violations of international law must stop immediately and be investigated. President, the Security Council visited the DRC this year to engage in dialogue with the Congolese authorities and to promote mutual understanding. The DRC's continued cooperation and dialogue with the United Nations remains essential. As this Council prepares to renew MONUSCO's mandate, a constructive and transparent relationship between this Council and the DRC is crucial to a successful disengagement process. I thank you. I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, President. I would like to thank SRSG Keita for her outstanding leadership of MONUSCO, as well as Ms. Lusamba for her briefing and for the contribution of civil society in the DRC. Colleagues, the humanitarian toll highlighted in the SG report is unspeakable, and the activities of armed groups and regional endgames have eroded the very fabric of the society, devastating communities and leaving scars that will last for generations. That's why peace in the DRC is not merely an aspiration, but a concrete, urgent need if we want also to see justice delivered. We reiterate our call for all armed groups to disarm immediately and engage in the reintegration initiatives. We are deeply concerned about the dangerous escalation of fighting among armed groups with M23, which has failed to comply with a full withdrawal according to the Luanda communiqué. At this point, we would like to appeal to Rwanda and the DRC to de-escalate and engage under the Luanda process to break free from the cycle of distrust and embark on a journey towards sustainable peace defined by cooperation, economic development, and shared prosperity. The whole region of the Great Lakes will benefit from it. The path of reconciliation may be challenging, but it starts with ending support for the M23 from Rwanda and its withdrawal from the territory of DRC, in respect of the territorial integrity of the DRC. At this critical juncture, when the country is preparing for the 20th of December elections, it is important to create and maintain an environment of transparency and trust, which is paramount to guaranteeing inclusivity, cohesion and legitimacy. Political intolerance and the restriction of civic space could only cause setbacks. The international community should follow closely and show to the Congolese people that we stand by them as they write this new chapter of democracy through the upcoming ballot. As the Council discusses the renewal of MONUSCO mandate, Albania has taken full note of the joint disengagement plan for the mission and commends the cooperation between the government and the mission during this process. We support the commitment to an accelerated yet responsible withdrawal, as long as no gaps are left that could benefit the armed groups. And in concluding, we reiterate our support for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the DRC. I thank you.
I I thank the representative of Albania for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Ecuador. I thank Ms. Bintu Keita and Ms. Sandrine Lusamba for their briefings, and I welcome the representatives of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda in this meeting. My delegation statement will focus on 3 areas. Firstly, Ecuador trusts that the elections to take place on the 20th of December will guarantee a free and transparent process towards a new democracy, which will require a strengthening of the Independent Electoral Commission of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Women and young people must be part of the decisions at all levels. Their participation is fundamental in any electoral process, since it contributes to generating inclusive, safe and peaceful societies. And acknowledging their participation in certain bodies during these elections, we also call for this participation to continue to be encouraged in the future. The report we have received notes that there are restrictions on the civic space, incitement to hatred, threats of violence and the arbitrary detention of members of the opposition and of the press. Ecuador therefore reiterates the need to defend the freedom of expression, opinion and association, and to protect human rights defenders and journalists, and to combat hate speech and intolerance. Secondly, the continued deterioration into violence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is disquieting. We are alarmed to learn that the over 900 cases of human rights defenders, a high percentage of which are perpetrated by armed groups, in particular against women and girls. Such acts must cease, and there must be accountability, allowing victims to live in dignity and their perpetrators to be brought to justice. The violence increases the need for humanitarian assistance, and the support of the international community is crucial to address the needs of the 25.4 million people who are facing food insecurity and the over 450,000 displaced persons in the North Kivu region. We urge the Congolese authorities to allow for humanitarian access and to guarantee their security. Thirdly, in the face of the decision by the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo on the early exit of MONUSCO, we reiterate the importance of ensuring a gradual, orderly and safe transition, upholding human rights and international humanitarian law in all phases. Abiding by the decisions of the Luanda and Nairobi processes is fundamental to achieve peace in the region. The regional, bilateral, international initiatives must work in a coordinated way for peace, dialogue and political stability, ensuring recognition and continuity of the work that MONUSCO has done. In this regard, we support the recent regional efforts which seek to de-escalate tensions between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda. Finally, my delegation repudiates acts of sexual exploitation and abuse by certain members of MONUSCO. This is an extremely grave matter which we have discussed in this Council and which should not only be investigated and sanctioned, but which also require measures to be taken to prevent recurrence and to bolster assistance to the victims. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I do apologize in advance for being somewhat detailed because this is a matter that is of vital significance for my delegation, and as particularly at this crucial period. Mr. President, As negotiations are underway on the announced withdrawal of the United Nations Mission for Stabilization in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as these negotiations are entering their final stage, I wish to take this opportunity to deliver upon the agreeable duty of reiterating to you on behalf of His Excellency, Mr. Félix-Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo, President of the Republic and Head of State, on behalf of the government of the DRC and my whole delegation, as well as in my personal capacity, our warmest congratulations on your accession to the presidency of the Security Council. To the members of the Security Council, the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, through me, conveys our most cordial salutations, as well as those of the people of the DRC who have been enduring a horrific war that of over more than 3 decades by a neighbor seeking to exert influence and to advance expansionist agendas of a past time. I also wish to take this opportunity once again on behalf of my government to state how much we appreciated the opportunity to work with the sister republic of Gabon and Ghana throughout their fruitful 2-year mandate at the Security Council of the United Nations. This mandate, which is currently drawing to a close, we extend our gratitude for the diligence with which these two fraternal countries have supported the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I also applaud Madam Sandrine Lusamba for her briefing. My delegation takes this opportunity to extend our utmost gratitude to the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for the remarkable efforts that he has unstintingly undertaken with an aim to end the clashes, to restore a lasting peace in my country. And we commend Mr. Guterres for his steadfast commitment with a view to the gradual withdrawal of MONUSCO from the DRC. This is still fresh in our memory. The brutal memories of the helicopter attack against the MONUSCO helicopter. The M23 rebels attacked the helicopter on 23 March 2022, and this claimed the lives of 8 United Nations Blue Helmets who were conducting a reconnaissance mission in North Kivu. Therefore, I wish to pay tribute to all of these valiant peacekeepers, these men, these women who, for the advancement of the ideals of the Charter of the United Nations, have been working shoulder to shoulder with local communities to advance political solutions, to prevent conflict, to protect civilians, to strengthen human rights, reinforce rule of law, and to establish peace, often under difficult and complicated circumstances. These people are far from their families, far from their countries. They have made many sacrifices, including for some the ultimate sacrifice. To the troop contributing countries, to the donors, the government and the people of the DRC wishes to, through me, extend gratitude for the efforts and the sacrifices made. And I wish to thank Madam Bintou Keita for the briefing she has just delivered about the Secretary General's report, document S/2023/932, dating 30 November 2023, entitled United Nations Stabilization Mission in the DRC. I also wish to take this opportunity to commend her leadership throughout the discussions which resulted in adoption of the with disengagement plan on 21 November last. Throughout this debate, this was addressed. Now I wish to turn to the crux of the matter. the historic relations between the country and MONUSCO on the one hand, and the process which has led us to the MONUSCO disengagement plan, which is currently today under discussion. In this regard, one would recall the fact that on 30 November 1999, the United Nations Security Council unanimously adopted Resolution 2069 establishing the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission. The people of the DRC have been victimized by armed hostilities from a neighboring state had hoped that the ceasefire and disengagement of forces that would result from this would bring about lasting peace and stability in the eastern part of the DRC, which was conflict-ridden. The mission of the United Nations Stabilization Mission in the DRC, MONUSCO, was born from the ashes of the former MONUC. Resolution 1925-2010 in July had a mandate to establish security, to build peace, to stabilize the country, and to bring about long-term development both for the DRC and for the Great Lakes region. History will retain the fact that MONUSCO also has to its credit progress in the implementation of its mandate, specifically with its contribution to the electoral process, the armed forces of the DRC, to the National Congolese Police, and to humanitarian initiatives. In 2013, MONUSCO provided the FARDC with valuable support to address the issue of the M23 North Kivu, thanks to the Force Intervention Brigade, the FIB, which comprised of soldiers from South Africa, from Malawi, and Tanzania. This was a brigade that was established by the Security Council on an exceptional level, exceptionally with an offensive mandate and the consequent military means. Regrettably, the FIB only lasted for a short time. Mr. President, one can therefore wonder why the question of the withdrawal of MONUSCO is now making headlines in the DRC. And here at the United Nations, after the debate in 2013, the M23 was exploited by Rwanda to exploit and destabilize the east of the DRC. It then resurfaced in November of 2021 when well-equipped fighters launched a series of deadly attacks targeting the FARDC positions and the Congolese Institute for the Conservation of Nature, which occupied the part of the shared border with between the DRC, Uganda, and Rwanda, and thereby tensions were exacerbated in the region. Since then, this movement, supported by the Rwandan Patriotic Army, multiplied attacks and conquered a number of positions which it has been occupying for a number of years, while the international community and the MONUSCO continue to be unable to implement the mandate entrusted to it by the Security Council to support the FARDC or to provide for the protection of civilians before leaving them to their unfortunate fate. MONUSCO, despite its scale, 20,000 military and police since 2016, 16,000 men deployed presently in Congo to support and backstop the efforts of the government, was unable to end the infernal cycle of the massacres of civilians, egregious massive violations of human rights, war crimes, crimes against humanity, as well as the illicit exploitation in full sight of the natural resources of the DRC by foreign armed groups. Quite to the contrary, these atrocities have continued, and they were magnified in the east of the DRC, specifically in Ituri province, in North Kivu and South Kivu. The terrorism of the movement extended its influence in Ituri through the Allied forces. There were massacres perpetrated in Ituri territory by the M23 with support from soldiers from the Defense Force of Rwanda in November of 2022 in Kishishe, and in March 2023 in Kazimba, in May of 2023 in Tongo, and in July 2023 in Bokongo, once again brought horror to our country. And this should have shaken the moral conscience of the community of nations, should have triggered the responsibility of those who exercise leadership through the Security Council of the United Nations, should have prompted them to impose peace in the east of the DRC. This is a situation which lies at the origin of the heated tensions, which for some time has plagued relations between MONUSCO and the Congolese population, specifically in the areas ravaged by armed violence. Given this situation, the reaction of the population was immediate. The hostility of the population against MONUSCO in North Kivu was heightened to the point of creating a psychosis when it came to security among the personnel. This resulted in violent incidents in 30 August 2023 in Oma with the death of 42 Congolese people. After that of June and July 2022 in Goma, Beni, in Tembo, in Kasindi, during which 30 Congolese people in 5 blue helmets lost their lives. Mr. President, in this vein, taking the floor at the General Assembly on 20 September last, the President of the Republic, His Excellency Felix Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo, stated, and I quote, "After more than 2 decades of its presence, it is time for our country to fully take its destiny in our hands and to become the main actor for our own stability. We are grateful to the international community and the United Nations for their support and for their partnership. However, we are also cognizant of the fact that the gradual withdrawal of MONUSCO is a necessary step to shore up on the progress that we have already achieved." End of quote. For the President of the Republic, therefore, the acceleration of MONUSCO's withdrawal became a necessity, an overriding necessity to diffuse tensions between the latter and the former and our fellow citizens. He instructed the government to begin negotiations with the United Nations authorities for an accelerated withdrawal of MONUSCO from the DRC. By bringing the beginning of a gradual withdrawal from December 2024 to December of 2023. This is the thrust of the correspondence between His Excellency Mr. Christophe Ntunga, and Vice Prime Minister, Minister for Foreign Affairs. The thrust of the correspondence addressed to the President of the Security Council in September 2023, requesting an accelerated withdrawal of MONUSCO. Mr. President, frankly speaking, my delegation welcomes the convergence of views that were fortunately seen between the government of my country, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and the Security Council through the document PRST 2023/5 dating 16 October last, both on the general observation of difficulties faced by MONUSCO in the exercise of its current mandate and on the need for its withdrawal, accelerated and progressive withdrawal. This presidential statement is the legal basis for the MONUSCO disengagement plan as was agreed upon in Kinshasa on 21 November 2023 following deliberations between the government and MONUSCO, which it should be noted worked in perfect harmony for designing the MONUSCO disengagement plan. That having been said, I now wish to turn to the withdrawal plan as it was negotiated. I welcome the fact that the Secretary General in paragraph 75 of his report was concise. For the DRC, the withdrawal plan, as was submitted, is the result of the consensus-based commitment of the two parties, which was duly signed by His Excellency Mr. Christy Vlitungula Penapela, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Madam Bintou Keita, Special Representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations in the DRC and head of MONUSCO, on behalf of the United Nations. The Democratic Republic of the Congo fully adheres to what was agreed upon and signed by the two parties, and we call for compliance in good faith with the commitments emanating therefrom. Therefore, it is incumbent upon the Security Council to endorse this, to ensure that it be implemented as such without modifications. Otherwise, there would be a jeopardizing of the balance that was established, and this would breach the trust that was established after waves of crises that plagued relations between MONUSCO and the local population. The war has not ended, nonetheless. The Council should maintain protection of the civilians from violence and should seek to ensure the full restoration of peace. Nonetheless, it is key for the Council to invest in the full implementation of the Luanda and Nairobi peace processes. These were endorsed and signed both by the African Union and the United Nations through your Council. I wish to recall the fact that the Nairobi process calls for the resumption of the political process based on mediation of His Excellency Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta, former President of the Republic of Kenya. Consultations at the political level were conducted as part of this process between the authorities of the DRC and the local armed groups on peace and security in Ituri province in North Kivu and South Kivu, with major progress and the organization of the first consultations, which in Nairobi brought together on 23 to 27 April 2022, brought together delegates from the local armed groups and the team of the Joint Secretary Team of Kenya and the DRC. Having reached the third stage, the Nairobi process, which saw participation of delegates from the M23 March movement, at the beginning of the discussions, was not interrupted. Only after the approach of the rebels, they sought to exploit a negative position. And they were expelled at the beginning of negotiations for calling for launch armed attacks against armed forces on 23 April 2023. In the current context, the two movements of the political process, which ended at its third phase, which already brought together a total of 56 other local armed groups, requires a holistic approach with concerted efforts between the Luanda and Nairobi processes. Mr. President, the majority of our partners advocate dialogue with neighboring Rwanda and do not, without bringing to mind the openness of open mind of our president. At the beginning of dialogue, of the mandate, a dialogue was embraced. I wish to stress that the DRC stands ready to engage in dialogue, provided that the objective conditions for meaningful dialogue are established, specifically a guarantee for proper conclusion of this dialogue in the context of broken trust and war, for wars occurring in the territory in the DRC. And the Congolese people are those who are dying. Our fauna and flora are being destroyed. Our mining resources are being plundered. Our population are living in fear and wandering with more than 7 million internally displaced persons. Furthermore, dialogue is one of the stages set out in the Luanda roadmap. In this regard, there's an important need to recall that the Luanda roadmap, among other things, provides for the following steps. Number 1, cessation of hostilities in general, and specifically an end to M23 attacks targeting the armed forces of the DRC and MONUSCO. 2, withdrawal of the M23 from occupied areas, and its withdrawal from the initial positions of the Mont Sabinho and the site of the DRC under the monitoring of the armed forces of the DRC, the regional force, and the ad hoc mechanism in collaboration with MONUSCO. 3, cessation of all political military support for the M23 and all other local armed groups and foreign groups who operate in the east of the DRC and the region. And with the disarmament and containment of the M23 in Congolese territory under the oversight of the armed forces of the DRC, with ad hoc verification mechanism implemented in conjunction with MONUSCO. The withdrawal, the return of displaced persons to their homes, and lastly, the resumption and pursuit of political level consultations between the government of the DRC and local armed groups, the Nairobi process, resumption of bilateral dialogue between the DRC and Rwanda with a view to normalization of diplomatic relations and the resumption of cooperation and review of and providing solutions for the question of return of all refugees to their home countries with coordination meetings held at all levels with the Luanda process and Nairobi process. To summarize, there's a need to recall that my foreign minister, His Excellency Christopher Lutunda Lapala, in his last statement at the Council on 28 September last, stated that the priority urgent need at present for the DRC at the security level, these priorities include an end to the Rwandan aggression, the withdrawal of its troops from North Kivu, the eradication of armed and terrorist groups in Congo, including M23, the return of displaced populations to their homes, the restoration of the authority of the state in the territories occupied by M23, as well as the implementation of the disarmament, demobilization, community recovery, and stabilization programs, the restoration of peace and security, put succinctly, throughout the country. Mr. President, turning to the renewal of MONUSCO's mandate, my government has demonstrated a flexible approach with another year for the implementation of the joint disengagement plan. And there are a number of main areas where MONUSCO should focus, include protection of civilians in a comprehensive way. That is the overriding priority of my government. Support for security sector reform, support to the Congolese National Police, and support for the armed forces of the DRC. The transfer of capacities to ensure ownership and support for the disarmament, demobilization, community recovery and stabilization programs, advocacy for programming and delivering support for those above-mentioned programs, support for the joint forces, support for the general elections in December of 2023, support for the regional forces officially engaged on the ground in the DRC, and other important and subsidiary tasks which do not prejudice the main goal of disengagement will be considered for this mandate. Mr. President, the MONUSCO disengagement plan, which we agreed upon, includes the withdrawal of MONUSCO. This is not an end in and of itself. The Security Council shoulders the responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security and will remain seized of the situation in the DRC. And the Security Council cannot end its commitment to upholding security and ending the insecurity plaguing the east of the DRC. You possess the legal and the political, the logistical capability to compel all of the recalcitrant parties to fully implement the roadmap emanating from the Nairobi and Luanda processes, and thereby to end a dangerous bogging down that is currently underway at the security level. And lastly, to once again paraphrase my foreign minister, act before it is too late. It is time to ensure that the proven aggressions of that are there's be accountability for the crimes that have been perpetrated. It is high time to raise our voices, to categorically call upon the M23 to lay down their weapons, to ensure that there be cantonment in the sites planned to that end, and for there to be incorporated into the community, the various programs, and for Rwanda to, without conditions, withdraw its troops from the DRC and to end its support for the M23. To conclude, I wish to reassure the Security Council of the fact that the DRC is staunchly committed to this new progress in the disengagement of MONUSCO. Backsliding is no longer possible. We will continue to work constructively by being proactive and creative each time there are challenges presented in the implementation of the complete disengagement plan. The provisions and other clauses related to flexibility are all assets that may be leveraged in light of challenges that may arise. The vision is clear of the government of the DRC to ensure that the disengagement plan be a paragon and a model for other withdrawals and disengagements of United Nations peacekeeping missions. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Rwanda.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor. As it's my first time addressing the Council as permanent representative of Rwanda, allow me to congratulate you and your esteemed team for your able leadership of the Council. I thank SRSG Bintu Keita for her briefing, as well as all the distinguished members of the UN Security Council for their valuable contributions. Mr. President, as we speak, the government of the DRC and its coalition of illegal armed militia groups, the FDLR, genocidal force, and foreign mercenaries have violated the ceasefire brokered and mandated by the regional peace process, including EAC, Nairobi, and Rwanda processes, which led to the withdrawal of M23, aggravating the already dire humanitarian crisis in the region. Unfortunately, Kinshasa has also terminated the EAC Africa Regional Force, which is currently withdrawing from this ongoing volatile situation. The premature departure of this force undermines all the regional efforts to bring peace to Eastern DRC. Rwanda takes this opportunity to urge the government of the DRC to recommit to regional agreements, which offer the best chance for peace. Mr. President, this MONUSCO report is silent on the human rights violation and the impunity of the FARDC, including the routine murder of civilians and the state-enabled persecution and violence against Tutsi communities in DRC. Last month, disturbing images of a Tutsi Congolese soldier, Captain Gisore Rukatura, being burned alive went viral on social media. Heinous crimes like these are a direct consequence of the prevalence of hate speech, discrimination, and genocidal ideology against Congolese Tutsi in Eastern DRC. Last week, during the 75th commemoration of the UN Genocide Convention, Special Advisor on Genocide Prevention, Ms. Iris Wairimu-Nderitu, warned about the instrumentalization and discrimination, misinformation, and hate speech for personal and political gains. Rwanda implores this council to hold the DRC government accountable for encouraging disinformation and allowing hate speech and ethnic violence to reach unprecedented levels. These actions warrant a commission of inquiry. Mr. President, another critical component characterizing the current period in the DRC is the violent anti-Rwandan rhetoric led by Congolese officials. Several candidates, including the incumbent president, Felix Tshisekedi, continue to threaten Rwanda with invasion, mass murder, and annexation. The incident of 21st October 2023, when heavily armed men, including the FDLR, mobilized at the DRC border with Rwanda, singing war songs in Kenya-Rwanda, and making crude threats, was brought to the attention of this Council. Rwanda takes these threats seriously, especially given the integration of FDLR into FARDC. We urge the DRC to cease its provocations. Mr. President, in closing, Rwanda reiterates that the solutions to the security challenges in the DRC cannot be found in blame games or externalizing DRC's internal problems. The solutions lie in inclusive and constructive dialogue, regional cooperation, cessation of hostilities, and prioritizing the well-being of the civilians. Rwanda remains committed to the ongoing regional efforts to stabilize the Eastern DRC, and we look forward to working together for a peaceful, stable, and prosperous region. I thank you.
Agradezco al
I thank the representative of Rwanda for their statement. The representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo has asked for the floor to make a further statement. Please be as concise as possible. I thank you. Thank you, President. I spoke at length, and I certainly do not intend to take up your time too much longer, but I just wish to say to the representative of Rwanda, first of all, I wish to congratulate Rwanda for the fact that they know so much about what is happening in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We do not exactly know what's happening within Rwanda. They're very interested in what's happening in the DRC, and we congratulate them for that. But I just wished to specify, with regard to genocide and genocidal discourse, which are becoming almost the leitmotif of the language of Rwanda, I just wish to say that if genocide could have a reference point in Africa, it is not in the DRC that we would find it. That is all I wish to say. Thank you very much. I thank the representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite Council members to informal consultations to continue our discussion on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.
Yes, bavandimwe rero mwabumvise naho mu kanya saa 3:45 aho ndi buze kubabwira ku Burundi, ku gitero cyabaye i Burundi binakekwa ko ari icyo u Rwanda cyangwa se abantu bashyigikiwe n'u Rwanda bateye mu Burundi hamwe bakaritura n'ikiraro. Bigenda bigarukaho rero uyu munsi, ndetse tukaza no kuganira n'uburyo Amerika yategetse Amerika yategetse RDF kuva Mushaki, Kirorirwe ndetse na Kicanga, ariko ibyo ngiye no kubivugaho kuri radiyo Iteme. Turabiganiraho mu minota itari munsi cyangwa se itari hejuru ya 45. Turaduhurira hariya kuri Iteme ndetse no kuri Iteme no kuri East Africa Daily mu masaha yayandi yacu y'irondo. Naho mu kanya.